So Carlos, tell me, how did you end up living on the streets? How did you end up homeless, and what was that experience like for you?
Well, it was totally, it happened quickly, and so it was a bit of a shocker. I was in the music industry, and although it was progressive, it was drugs related. The sudden realizing that you now gotten yourself to the point that I'm not one of those people that begs people or asks people for any assistance. I think that was part of the problem. There's also not a support system like we have in the States for in the music industry. There's Music Cares, which is associated to the Grammys. It's an organization that supports addiction in the music industry. We don't have that here, which I think is something that they should actually look at. Because it's, there you go to a launch and the hors d'oeuvres table is not as big as the drugs supply table. So, it's accepted as part of the culture. It's an in-house secret type of thing. But realizing that that's where I was now I wasn't street smart. I'd had a successful career since the age of 21, where I had my first music store. Then I started a record company. So it was totally, I've been all over the world, and to suddenly be in a situation where there's gang members all around you, and you soon realize that initially I thought it was all about gangsterism, and it's not. I mean, there's a whole community that is homeless, and the gangs that we see infiltrate those communities because it's an easy place to hide. And society has so fallen for the myth of the fact that they're all criminals that it's easy for them to get away with that.
And did people treat you differently when you were homeless? Did you feel like society treats homeless people different from ordinary people?
Without a doubt. The first thing that I picked up was when I started my stall on the deck on the where the taxis are, and I soon realized I can't beg and I can't stand at a robot, so I had to find a way of making a living. So I started off, a couple in Sea Point gave me 17 items that I started a second-hand trading store basically on the deck. They were very good items, let me put it to you that way. But at where I stood, there was a taxi stop where one of the ladies that used to be on the Street People's Forum, which we probably will discuss a bit later on, I'd been involved in the homeless sector since before I became homeless. And I was quite seen in the sector. And so when that happened and I landed up on the streets, she used to catch her taxi right in front of my stall. And I saw the first time that I saw her, there was shock registering on her face, but she totally ignored me. She didn't greet me or anything. And for a year, she took a taxi there and never, ever greeted me, despite the fact that I made the attempt to be. And I mean, I was the same person. I might have looked a little different, and I might have, I probably even smelled a little different, I don't know. You don't realize that when you're on the street. But she totally ignored me, and we were close before then. And then, strangely enough, when I was rehomed this past year, and again became active in the sector, not wantingly, believe me, but by chance, her reaction to me was as if we had just not seen each other for a long while. And so it became the very first issue of Inkatali was when I stood up and said people must stop now seeing me as not a homeless person, because suddenly I wasn't a homeless person. Now I was discovered as Mesquita again, which to me was not acceptable. And she knew me. And so that gives you the extreme of how it is, because I mean, the people that don't know you, I can accept. But she knew who Cuddles was, and she knew me when I returned out of homelessness. It was like hug, and you've just been away. And I had to confront her about that, and I did it in a public way.
You say that you've never worked so hard as you have when you were homeless. I mean, you were very active in your working life before you were homeless.
Very much so.
You've never worked so hard? Explain that.
Yeah, I worked very, very hard when I was in the music industry. I produced albums. I was in the studio with the artists, sometimes 16 hours a day, but not as much as in homelessness. It's a daily thing. In order to survive, if you're not doing crime and you're just a homeless individual, people might think, oh, it's easy, you just go to a dustbin, you're going to pick something up and you're going to go sell it and there's your day done. There is that issue. You have to survive every day, so you need to eat. Those were my priorities. I needed to eat and I needed to smoke. And although I was on drugs by that stage, it's something that you can't not do. I mean, I'd done drugs before coming into homelessness, but I had been off drugs for quite a while prior to, you get to that point. If you get to homelessness from being where you were, obviously there's not much money left over. So when you get to that point, you don't do drugs anymore because you shock yourself into that reality that you're now at this point in your life. So I went into homelessness without being on drugs. But of course, it's just like in the music industry, it's very available there. And drug use, even in the music industry, there are people that use and there are people that don't use. You can't say the whole industry is like that. The only reason that I was, and today I can tell you that through my homeless experience, I think, and my perception of it is that people that are trying to deal with serious issues, and I mean, I had plenty of them, and I said I still have some, but not all of them. I've had to deal with them. And the more you deal with your issues, the less it becomes important to have that drug in your life. That drug is not substituting for whatever it is that we need that we don't have. And so when I came into homelessness, I was off the drugs, but within a month, I was back in it. Number one, it was accessible, and number two, it was the only way I could handle it. I mean, yeah, I come from a very privileged background that I'd built up. It wasn't as if I had a rich family, but I'd built up this basically empire, which I'd lost. And so to now be sleeping on the streets, not knowing, the first week or two, I didn't know how to survive. I mean, I was going hungry because I will not beg. And so somebody said to me, you know what, come on a scuttle with us. I said, me digging a dustbin? I understand. If my mom is no longer here, but I mean, she's around, believe me. And she would have freaked if she saw me digging a dustbin, because I was the type of child that had those excessive behaviors that I had to wash my hands 13 times a day or 12 times a day. Every time I touched something, I had to go wash my hands. So for me to dig in a dustbin was another story. But I became, and the biggest compliment I've ever been paid was a young boy, and this young boy turned to his mom and said, "Mommy, die oom, hy's karel gevaarlik." And I thought to myself, yo, okay, that's the ultimate compliment. So I did become the king of Skarel, and that's why I had my store. Eventually I couldn't Skarel anymore. I had to pay people to go and Skarel for me. So
I think a day in the life people don't understand about your business. Yeah. So when you say that you worked hard, what were you doing?
Basically, you get up at 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, because the bins start getting put out early in the morning. A lot of people don't put them out in the evening anymore because of all the mess that they see. So they put it out early in the morning. So in order to get to the bins on time, because by 8 o'clock it's all over, you know, the truck has been, etc. So you're working against time. And so you do it early in the morning, and then once you've done that, you know, whatever you've gotten, you have, if you have a business like I had, and I'm staying in Sea Point, Upper Sea Point, right up there in Ocean View Drive, and the business is in town, and I've got 2 of these big trolleys, those big ShopRite trolleys, but not the push ones, the big ones that they use for merchandise. And I have to get it down from Sea Point up there, down to town. Down is still okay. Coming back up in the afternoon is another story. So then you have to clean the stock that you've got, then you've still got to put it together with your other stock, come down into town and be there to open up. At that stage I opened up at 9 because I was on the deck. When I moved into town, you basically have to be at the parade at 6 o'clock in the morning, so there's no time to play around. Then I trade, either from 6 or 9, depending on whether I was doing the deck or the parade, and I trade 12 hours until 6 that afternoon. And then it's time again to go to the afternoon bins, which are just being put out for the next day. So you only get to bed like at, you know, whatever, 1 o'clock, and then you sleep till 4 or 3 or whatever. And you have to do it all over again the next day. And in the meantime, you're pushing that trolley. When you push it back up from there to Sea Point, if I think about it now, I burst out laughing, because, I mean, you try and ask me to do it now, I can't do it. And it's not because I think I'm hyper pie again, it's just that I'm not on those drugs. I mean, you know, the crystal meth has this impact on you that you just don't know when to stop. Yeah. And so you were pushing up. I mean, I cannot believe myself doing it. You guys have been up to the mountain. Yeah. Now, if we have to go from here, I'm not talking from town, from here to the mountain, you'll be out of breath if you go at the pace that I pushed the trolley up there, all the way up.
I'd be out of breath without a trolley.
It's hard work, and you know, I had a lady one day. I'd been about there since 4. I was lying against the wall of the building, and because those bins come out at about 5, she came out at about 6, and she saw that I was. I saw her from across the road, and she watched me the whole time. And I really got lucky that day. Somebody had moved out or something out of the flats, and so they dumped a lot of things into the bin. So much so that I'd gone and borrowed a bin so that I could push away all the stuff that I'd gotten out of that one bin. And there was nice stuff, and she came down to me after she saw me taking it out, cleaning it up, because I thought, let me just clean up and I'll go directly from here to town. I'm not even going to go get my other stock. And she came down and she said, oh, I like that. I want that. I said, you want? It's so much. She said, you take it out of the bin, you want to charge me? I said, ma'am, this is how I earn my living, and if you so badly wanted it, why didn't you come down at 4 o'clock? And why didn't you take it out of the bin, and why didn't you wash it? So, unfortunately, you have to pay for it, or otherwise you can come and pay double the price at my store. So, the choice is yours. So, that is, it's a business. It's a business. I mean, you go into a taxi every day, and people are, and, then I'll say to them, and then they want to throw you off the taxi, and I say, listen here, I work hard. There are people that come in here that work hard, and they're sweaty or whatever. This is a job that I do. I try and clean up afterwards, but if I'm not to you, well, I'm paying, and this is the job that I'm doing. I'm not robbing you, and
Money's good.
So people tend to be very judgmental.
What has been your experience of law enforcement as a homeless person?
The law enforcement agencies, as a whole, are good and bad. Law enforcement itself, I think that they've basically been trained for this job and are focusing on homeless people. If you look at the budget of the cost of homelessness that was published last year, the biggest cost in homelessness, in the whole question of homelessness, is the enforcement of the law for homeless people. Now that doesn't make sense, because if you look at the what you're actually benefiting from policing that group of people, and what are the crimes that they are actually enforcing the law on, and what is the financial implication for the country? What have they saved the country of by spending all that money? How do they justify it? Because here they spend tens of thousands of rands or hundreds on enforcing the law as far as policing the homeless, but all they get are small little cases. 1 packet of Turk, 3 months. Pushing a trolley, 6 months. That type of, is it really impacting on saving the economy any money by using that amount of money on? It doesn't add up. If we were talking about the good posts, and you say to me you're spending that much money policing that type of white-collar crime, then I say, that, well done, if you're getting successes there. But you see, we become what they are. They have targets. They set themselves targets. And so we become their target of, okay, it's almost the end of the month, we go to the parade, and we know that all the drug dealers are there on a Friday night, and so we're going to easily catch not the dealers, but the one buying the 1 packet and the 2 packets, etc., which means nothing. I mean, send that to a lab, and the lab will say to you there's 0.0 whatever percent of crystal meth. The rest is rubbish that's in there. Because the packets you buy 20 rand are pure rubbish. I mean, it's not crystal.
Yesterday, the city issued a notice to residents and business owners to document the problems that they were experiencing with homeless people. What do you think precipitated that letter?
Okay, let me tell you, I'm very grateful that came out of the blue, landed up on my laptop, because it was obviously somebody within that sent it to me. Because this happens very often, but we never can prove it. We just say the whole time, everybody in the city is behind us, the councillors and everybody, and there is something happening, it just doesn't happen. We now have court cases at the moment. For the first time, since the Strandfontein court case that we put up a fight in Strandfontein and actually had our voices heard. Then with lockdown, of course, we also had the pie and everything where you're not allowed to, during this time, evict. And so this has frustrated the city of Cape Town no end, because they pride themselves on us being such a clean city, and because we put away the rubbish, put away and that is how the homeless are seen. I'm sorry to say. I work with it daily, and I've been the rubbish, and now I see it happening to the rubbish, because that is how the treatment of those people are. And so when I saw that letter, I thought, okay, well, for the first time, we actually have a scene going from councillor to councillor and then being taken, never publicly. Believe me, it wasn't meant to be public. Although it says it was cleared by the legal department, they've checked on the legal things. But that is a full attempt on, when they go into court, that they've got all the complaints from it's not us, the DA, that are fighting this. It's all the shop owners and the business people that are complaining that the homeless are doing this. And if you look at the questions they ask, why don't you give, if you're really being fair, let's give a questionnaire to the homeless people as well about how law enforcement treats them and their human rights and the abuses against them. That they're not doing. All they're doing is focusing on the criminal element, which are not the homeless people. I mean, why don't they understand that homeless people are not a homogeneous group? We aren't homeless people in this house, or previously homeless people. there are so many, as you see, even I'm on the us and them thing. Even in home society, you get criminals. You get blue-collar crime, you get white-collar crime, you get addicts, you get people that are addicted. That is what society is about. And we are part of society. The fact that you are homeless should not define you. It should be an aspect of you, and an aspect that is really manageable and curable. Somebody asked me in an interview the other day, says, but there's no way that you can stop homelessness. It'll be there forever. I say, no, poverty will be there forever. There'll always be the haves and the have-nots. But when you get to the point that you go into homelessness, that can be prevented and that can be managed. There's no doubt about that. And it's been proven in cities across the world where they decided to treat it as something not like poverty. Don't ever put poverty and homelessness together. That is the extreme side of poverty, and it's something that can be definitely, you can get it to a point. We're working on a 10-year plan where you basically take, you stop chronic homelessness, where people are on the street for 10 years and 7 years and whatever. And you prevent, people will still, through poverty and whatever else leads to getting into homelessness, and they'll still land up homeless. But if your systems are in place, my goal is that they won't spend longer than a week homeless before they are in the system, getting them back into society. Because a roof over your head, from way back, it's a basic human right. It really should be a basic human right to have a roof over your head. I'm not saying having 17 mansions in Ocean View Drive, as some people have. I'm talking about, if you look at Maslow's theory, it says to you, the first things that we aspire to is food and some shelter. That's all that one asks. And if you have that, there's a lot that you can. This house is proof of that. It didn't have to be this glorious house that it is. I mean, the reason we're in the situation that we're in at the moment is that, again, people come up and say they're going to help you, and they put you in a situation that afterwards they, oh, sorry, we were just doing a research project, but now I'm stuck here and I've got this house that costs this amount of money. We cannot afford it. Nobody can afford it. And you didn't tell me we were a research project, you understand? So now what do I do? Because I'm definitely not allowing them to go back onto the street, and I'm definitely not going back there. So when you help, make sure that you tell people how you're helping them and what your, the period of time, and don't just, people want to help and they just don't know how to help. I think that's the biggest problem that we have. In many aspects, we are proof of that. But this house is a proof, the model. When I suggested this model, it was precisely to say to people, you know what, give the roof over the head, give the food, just for a period. Okay, after a while you stop that food, because then people are supposed to be moving on. Otherwise you're going to keep them, as little, people that just are entitled. I don't like entitlement, you see. So what I was suggesting here was not, I want to be privileged and I want to have a roof over my head and you're going to pay for me to have food for the rest of my life. That's not what it's about. The roof over my head must be for forever and a day. But the food, I have to go out and make sure I source that food. And I have to learn to pay for this accommodation, do you understand? But then you must put me in an accommodation setup that is at the level that one would be able to afford. You don't do something like this for show, because you're going to do a lot of videos about the people in the house, and so you wanted to look at, and then 6 months down the line say, oh, sorry, we're closing up the house, we can't pay anymore, which is the situation we're in. I will never ever forget the wonderful gesture of taking us off the street as a group of 168 people and saying, here's my office block. If I start talking about it, I'll get emotional. So let's avoid that.
What is the impact of having been here? What is the impact of having that roof over your head? How does it change your life?
More so before we got into this house. The impact of taking us in initially into the community chest building was amazing, because, and the other thing was, it wasn't only handing over that key to me and saying, here's a 4-story building that you just keep nicely, and then you hand it back to me, at the end of the period, whenever you're done with the building. And really, they did that. They handed over the keys to a building full of computers, full of laptops. They had me, and under that is part of the committee, that were responsible for this. I was having hot flushes that first day. I thought to myself, what have you done? Because I thought to myself, it's cold, it's raining. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to take the keys. but how am I don't know these people, because again, they're homeless, but I don't know them. We were thrown into Strandfontein, all of us, whether you came from here, there, or anywhere, so you don't really know them. And you know that there's a criminal element within this group, as there would be if we were not homeless.
Correct.
And so part of that criminal element is going to try and steal the laptop, and is going to try and steal something, because it's everywhere. I mean, the ladies even had handbags that they left there. So it was a big thing, but it was also a very humbling thing. And that was the thing that I explained to everybody. We have to respect the fact that these people did this, and really respect it. To such a degree that when we walked out of there 2 months later, it was said, I mean, the building looks better than when we gave it to them. We had the auditors phone me and say to me, Carlos, I need a picture. You need to go outside, take a picture so that we can prove the building is still standing. That is how bad it was, what they expected to happen because of the 168 homeless people there. Yet anybody that visited will tell you. I mean, one lady said to me, I wish my toilets and bathrooms in my house looked as clean as yours do here. That is how we manage the place. And if you give people agency and you say to them, you know what, here it is, I trust you, then they're not going to disappoint you, believe me, definitely not the people that have been struggling for such a long period.
You registered a non-profit organization. Tell me a little bit about its objectives.
Okay, the idea had been there before December, but in December when we had notice from Community Chest that they were going to stop supporting the project because it was just a research project for 6 months, I then went into a flurry because we didn't know what we were going to do. So out of desperation, I quickly, how we managed to do it, I don't know, but we got the landlady involved as well. So I got 4 ladies involved that had been supporting us all along. And I asked them to help me register the organization, which was going to be the Rehoming Collective. The idea behind it started when we had the Nkatalo conversations, which were conversations that were held between the sector service providers and the homeless people. We came out of Strandfontein feeling very anti-service providers because none of them had stood up for us at Strandfontein. Nobody, although I later found out that they did try, there was no vocal objection by the service providers. It was the public, not so much the service providers. And we were, I was sending out information on a daily basis. It was a small BlackBerry, so we felt as if they'd left us to our own devices, despite the fact that they always claimed to, advocate for homeless people, etc. And so the Nkatalo conversations were about the whole sector. What needs to be changed, etc. And the one thing that when we left Nkatalo, besides the fact that we realized we could actually work with the service providers, if they'd just listen to us for a change rather than tell us what to do, because that's the situation at the moment. And the one thing that came out of that was the fact that the one aspect of homelessness that is not only bent but completely broken is the housing of the homeless people, because that is paramount to moving on with their lives. And so the Rehoming Collective was that. It was basically an answer, what I felt would be a potential answer, and it was my answer to the whole Nkatalo process, was contained within that document. When we and then our house became the first of the houses that we are suggesting for, don't look at the house and say, oh, all the homeless people are going to live in this type of house. But it's the fact that you have different levels of being homeless and different people. As I said, the one reason that Strandfontein did not work and why the system doesn't work at the moment is that whether you are disabled, whether you're aged, whether you're a pregnant woman, whether you are a wet alcoholic, which means you're still using alcohol, or whether you drive and you're trying to keep off the alcohol, everybody's put together. So you're not solving anybody's issues, and there's no specialized service at the moment. I feel, the elderly should be in old age homes, but we don't have sufficient of them, and we don't have those that are affordable for everybody to live in. And so the homeless sector has always been totally oversubscribed with the elderly and the disabled. The other problem is that the shelter operators that we currently have in Cape Town are all from the let's call them apartheid shelters, because they're all over 30 years old. And they've always preferred to keep the elderly and the disabled, not because they're less trouble, but because they've got one SASSA card with them, you see. And SASSA card means you can pay. And so they pay towards their stay at the shelters, and so the shelters prefer to take them on, which is totally wrong, because they then bottleneck the whole system, and there's no space as it is in the shelters at the moment.
Were any promises made towards yourselves when you realized that this accommodation was temporary in terms of other housing that would be available? Did the city come on board and perhaps let you know that they might make a plan for you?
You know, this is a process that's still going on, so I don't want to, say much about that, except for the fact that the reason we're taking it on is the fact that there were promises made. Right up to January this year, I've got letters from the funder that said that they would, although they agree that this is totally unsustainable, they would be with us in that process of finding other places where we could then move it to, because it was never our choice to be here. You know, we had to accept that we were here. And to the funder, it would have been acceptable to just close up the project, because that's what it was to them. I didn't know that when we moved in here. I found that out only in, I think, August, September. And so as a project, if you're a business person, yes, it makes sense, just close it up and go. But you're dealing with human beings here, and you're dealing with people that you've taken off the street and which have, through a process, gotten to, or being, well, basically 77% were employed. So within a 6-month period, that's one hell of an achievement. So you can't now say to people, okay, well, you now go back onto the streets. 77 were employed and were able to now start paying towards their accommodation. But at the levels that you can, at this level where you will call it an independent living space, where people are living independently, even then you have to take into consideration what their salaries are before you come up with an amount for their rent. And so although the rent, they pay rent, it's such a low amount that you hardly cover the overhead expenses. So this type of accommodation will always have to have funding. We don't have any funding. We've got 0% funding, with the exception of the fact that we had a rental funder. With that being taken away from us, we go into June having no funding whatsoever. And so, although we get donations in and we can survive on certain things, there's no way that we can afford anything at this point in time, because we then went into started negotiations with the city in January. The minute I found out that this was now going to be finished, as far as rental funding was concerned from the organization that was funding us, I started speaking to the city about empty buildings and houses, etc., as part of the Rehoming Collective, because the Rehoming Collective, although it's an organization we formed, the movement as such and what's behind it, if you look at the board members that are brought on board, represent various aspects of the homeless sector. So you'll have STAND, which is a huge organization in drug rehabilitation, on the board, so that we know that every house is going to have a focus on the rehabilitation of individuals. There's Let's the Beer, that's got Anchored Lives, which specifically offers opportunity of employment and upliftment and empowerment. So she's on the board. Every board member has been chosen for a particular reason, and it includes people from different organizations. So everybody has their own organizations to focus on. But homing the homeless is something that affects all of us. So the thing that we are basically stating is that if you want to get rid of homelessness, as I said before, poverty you can't get rid of, homelessness you can. First thing you have to do is you have to address that you have to get them into some kind of accommodation. Again, I say, don't base it on what we had for the first 6 months. This was a project. But if you got accommodation, you can then, in order for the homeless person, I speak as a homeless person when I speak to you now, for me to actually look forward to tomorrow, now that I've got a roof over my head, I can get clean, etc., those are good things. There's somebody here that said, oh, Carlos, if I have to go back to the mountain, I just want to take my bed in the shower. And so that is how most homeless people feel, that they're able to get a good night's rest and that they can be cleaned up. Once they get that, they're quite happy to work. Because as I said to you, I worked harder as a homeless man than I ever did, having record companies where I flew all over the world. And I worked damn hard, believe me. So, and you'll say to me, but you're not dealing with the fact that a lot of them are on some substance, etc., which is a natural thing in homelessness. But the type of drug that most homeless people get addicted to is not usually a physically addictive drug. We've got the problem with Unga that came in, and the reason with Unga, which is actually what one would have called heroin in the past, a problem there, why they get hooked on that is that they started off by doing a cocktail of what is tik and Unga. I can't even remember what they're called, I think something ball. I never tried it. The problem is that if you do that, you then become addicted to the heroin in the cocktail, and so you become, unfortunately, it's a bad addiction. There you are physically addicted to the drug. The addiction to what they call tick, which is also not 100% crystal meth, the only thing that does for you is that it gives you energy and keeps you going. So that is a mental addiction. You think it's doing that for you. So if you get your mind strengthened enough to believe that you can get off it and you work towards that, you get off it. So to me, the priority is, I ran this, started this house with people still under those influences. And nothing major happened that was negative. Because once they get the roof over their head, they got fed initially, now they buy their own food. And then you get them employment or show them that they are able to afford something. And not only their accommodation, but everybody wants to be able to go and buy a wrap or whatever it is that they want to. So it's important, before you even go to the addiction, it's important for them to have some kind of income coming in. Also with addiction, you must understand, if you are getting your money through digging in a dustbin or whatever, you don't really have responsibility. It's easy come, easy go type of thing. Whereas if you work on a daily basis and you have to budget, etc., it's easier for you to stop giving it out on that. So our priority is housing, employment, and then we say to them, like the STAND program is, where they don't say to you, you bad person for doing drugs, but rather support the person whilst they're on drugs and say to them, listen, this is a better way of doing things, make sure you don't overdose. Yeah. And in that process, get them to the point that they want to give up the drug, and then take them through rehabilitation.
What would you want the broader society to understand when it comes to homeless people? What message would you like to send to them?
Well, you see, everybody thinks, oh, Carlos, but you had that before and you've got an education, that you're different to everybody else on the street. No. You know what? This is the second batch of people that are in this house. We now have 31 here as the second batch. The second batch is now 87% employed, and you can interview anyone here. You've been around. You're welcome to interview anybody here. They are no different to your mother, your sister, your brother. Some have got an education that is even superior to mine. Some of them have no education. But that you find in society in general. So people that are homeless, the only thing they've got in common is the fact that they don't have a roof over their head. You cannot judge somebody based on that, because that does not define who they are. And so to go out there, and just because that person is carrying, you can see he's homeless because he's carrying 10,000 bags to carry his whole life around with him, does not make him a bad person. That is why I used right at the beginning that example of that lady that used to work with me in the sector, going from 5 years of working with me every day, or at least 3 times a week, to going to totally ignoring me, although I'm the same person, and then 4 years later, 5 years later, turning back to what she was before, but she could not handle that. So then I have to question, is it to do with me, or is it to do with you? And so I have to say that it's to do with the public as such. And there, I don't know what it is, whether it's a personal thing, whether it's a... I found in scuttling as well, you cannot, as a white person, go and dig in a white man's dustbin and expect him to be happy in Sea Point, because you see, they take it, they'll be better to people that aren't white, because this is an embarrassment. You see, this is an embarrassment. You bring it too close to home, because white people don't do this. Unfortunately, we have to admit, we live in a country where those things still happen. And so it shows you as far as we've got a long way to go. And people should just realize that these people are human beings. Life happened to them. Let's call it life, because that is what life is. You're going along and then life happens. I tell you, I didn't know it was going to happen with me. I had no. If you had told me 5 years prior to that I would be doing what I was doing then, just like now. I mean, if you had told me a year ago, I'd be sitting here talking to Carte Blanche and sitting here behind a laptop and a cell phone, and I would have said, you're mad. Because life does happen, and the man upstairs is sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen. And I think that the good thing about COVID was that with homelessness, we were stuck in Strandfontein. We weren't allowed even to see a lawyer. I always say it's worse than prison, because in prison you get to see a lawyer. There, we weren't allowed to. I mean, you had to really duck and dive to get to the gate and to quickly do your dealing before law enforcement grabbed you. So the fact that we were there out of our own free will is the biggest joke on this planet. So ultimately, I think what COVID showed a lot of people that were prepared to see that far is, you know what, whether I've got that huge house there or whether that person is sitting there on the mountain, here's another story. In Sea Point, and this dictates to that. There was a lady, I used to have a property in Sea Point, Upper Sea Point, in the good old days, called in Selborne Place. That was the building's name. And when I scuttled, I also scuttled there. When I got to homelessness, I used to go to that building and dig in their dustbins. So I've done both sides of that building. One day I was coming down, I was on my way to town to my store, and there's a lady, and she was going off at one of the gentlemen, African gentlemen that was digging in the bins. So I approached her, and I got involved. I said, sorry, none of my business, but do you have to speak to the gentleman like that? She said, it's none of your business. I said, well, I'm making it my business because on any other day I'll be doing exactly what he's doing. And I was okay dressed that day because I was going to the market and not to scuttle. And so she said, oh, please. And I said, really? Go look up on the registration of this place and you'll see that unit number 6 was mine. In 1997, I would have been your neighbor. So, you know, and I gave her the name of the registered company that bought it because it was bought in a CC. And I said to her, so you know what, I've lived in that building that to me cost 4 million. Yours probably cost 14 million because of the inflation of prices. But today I live for free. On that mountain I've got a better view than you have. So don't tell me about, you know, and I think a lot of people have got to that realization over COVID that no matter who they are, what they are, you weren't allowed to move out of your home either. You were stuck in your house. Didn't give you any privilege. And so it did bring that a bit closer, as to, there you go, you've got no privileges right now. And it can be taken away from you. And we all know two things in life. You're born and you die. And quite frankly, you're taking nothing with you, believe it or not. Who's to say that my death is going to be any more unpleasant than yours? And where we're going to land up? We don't know these things. That's what life is about. Let me tell you, I'm the very first person to say to you that people will refuse to go into shelters. And then people get very upset, but why? How can they refuse it? Because if you haven't been in a shelter, don't ask me that question. At Strandfontein, we had one tent, 600 people. When they tried to put up the sign of that shelter organization, those 600 people stood up like one man and brought the sign down. The other two shelter organizations' signs were up. So when that happens, surely you're going to, if you are the CEO or whoever, you're going to question, why did that happen? Because these are 600 people from different areas, and they all think this about my organization. You question it. So there are reasons why people don't go to those shelters. If I had to go back to homelessness today, and I wrote this in my column the other day, and somebody said, how can you still be advocating that? Because whilst that happens, I don't want to be part of the sheltering setup. But as we stand at the moment, fortunately, I can say that they are completely full. We get lists every day. So you cannot tell people not to help, not to give to give responsibly, and all that type of thing, because unfortunately, until the city has got enough accommodation that is dignified for a homeless person to move into, and that treats them with dignity, don't come and tell me about not giving or giving responsibly and that type of thing.